Good afternoon. Welcome, 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 Trinity, United Church of Christ, Gary. I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us for yet again another inspiring, invigorating, prolific Tuesday at 12 noon Bible study. Oh my gosh, we have been having fun. We have been having fun. We have been having fun. What do you think is the reason for our fun? Oh, hmm? Oh, I am so glad you asked. I am so glad you asked. I am so glad you asked. We have been having so much fun because we have been delving into a particular book. And I know what you're going to say now. You're going to say, well, what book is that? Well, I'm so glad you asked that. We have had the opportunity to delve into an amazing book. Oh, this book has been awesome. In honor of March being Women's History Month, we have had an opportunity to delve into this phenomenal book by this amazing scholar by the name of Dr. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder of Chicago Theological Seminary. The name of this book is entitled When Mama Speaks, the Bible and Motherhood from a Womanist Perspective. If you haven't had an opportunity to grab this book, let me tell you, this is a jewel. You will have a blast checking out all of the wonderful learnings that our beloved Dr. Crowder highlights. And so we have been delving into the various stories in this book in honor of March being Women's History Month. Last week, we covered Hagar. And today, we are looking at the story of Rizpah. That's right. Today, we are going to delve into the story of Rizpah. Yes. So I want to invite you, family, if you have pen and paper handy, please, please, please hurry, grab pen and paper. Also have some water handy, maybe even some tissue. I understand that our conversations during our Bible study are based around trauma and can be maybe a little trauma inducing for you. So we want to ask if you please have tissue available, maybe even a glass of water. That will be helpful for you during this time. All right, family, we're going to delve right into the text. We are looking at 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 14 in particular. 2 Samuel chapter 21, verses 1 through 14. All right, let's jump into it. Now, there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord. And the Lord said, there is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had tried to wipe them out in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. David said to the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make expiation that you may bless the heritage of the Lord? And the Gibeonites said to him, it's not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house. Neither is it for us to put anyone to death in Israel. He said, what do you say that I should do for you? And they said to the king, the man who consumed us and planned to destroy us so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel, let 7 of his sons be handed over to us, and we will impale them before the Lord of Gibeon on the mountain of the Lord. And the king said, very well, I will hand them over. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to pause for a second. There is so much in these verses from verses 1 through 14, but I just want to pause for a second and let us jump into these verses 1 through 6 first and foremost. There is a few reflective points we want to highlight in this text. First and foremost, we discover that Israel is in a drought for 3 years. Israel is suffering in a pandemic. Yes, 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 yes. Israel is suffering in a pandemic. And when I said that, there is something that should have a little light bulb that should have went off in your mind when I said Israel finds themselves in a pandemic. That's right. They find themselves in a drought, if you will. And there's something, I know you didn't miss it. I know you didn't miss it. I know you didn't miss it. There's something that should have immediately been highlighted for you when I said Israel has been in a famine or a drought for 3 years. You should have immediately connected the dots to our current pandemic. We have been in a pandemic for 3 years called COVID-19 since 2020. We understand now what Israel, brothers and sisters, possibly were experiencing because we've been experiencing those same feelings in the last 3 years for the whole year 2020, for the whole year 2021, and into now 2022. And so we understand what our brothers and sisters were feeling like. And interestingly enough, today we say droughts, famines are a type of ACEs. ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. There are generally 3 types of ACEs that people experience today. There's a household ACEs, there's a community ACEs, and there's an environmental ACEs. And so the children of Israel find themselves in the 2nd chapter of Samuel 21 in an environmental ACEs. That's right. They're in a famine, in a drought. You see where famines and droughts are highlighted on this image? Under climate crisis. Under climate crisis. We understand because we're currently in a pandemic or a natural disaster crisis of COVID-19. And we believe that ACEs causes trauma. That's right. ACEs causes trauma. And so we see in 2 Samuel 21 that our Israel brothers and sisters are faced with trauma because of these climate crisis or drought or famines that they are faced with. And so we in COVID-19 are also faced with trauma as we are in COVID-19. And this trauma causes us to experience PTSD, stress, and other forms of mental health challenges. And so, yes, we totally sympathize with our brothers and sisters in Israel during this particular time. And the irony in this text is oftentimes during crisis, what do we do? What do we do? During crisis, we turn to God and we say, God, what happened? Why are we being faced with this? Now, I have a brief disclaimer for a second. There is bad theology that's been circulating during our COVID-19 pandemic, right? We often believe that when crisis hits our life, it is because we've done something wrong. It is because we've sinned. That's right, beloved. Oftentimes there are 3 perspectives theologically that we wrestle with when crisis hits our life. We either believe we've done something wrong, so this crisis is a punishment, or we believe that we're currently being tested. We believe that we're being tested. We believe that we're being tested. We believe that we are current day Jobs and Jobettes, and we're currently being tested. Or we believe that, number three, God is not with us. God is not with us. In the field of pastoral care, in the field of chaplaincy, in the field of spiritual care, we say these three types of belief systems are unhealthy. That's right, family. We say that it's not healthy to believe these three types of belief systems, right? Whatever you're faced with in your life, whatever crisis you're faced with in your life, you didn't do anything wrong. This is not a punishment from God. COVID-19 is not a punishment from God. I don't care how many people inappropriately, unethically, immorally cite Bible passages to show, oh, this must be a punishment from God. We must resist bad theology. We must not allow bad theology to go viral, right? You have not done anything wrong. No, God is not testing you. The crisis that comes up in your life is not a test. You are not Job. You are not Jobette. No matter what friends may try to tell you, like friends tried to tell Job, don't believe it. You are not being punished from God. You are not experiencing a test. And guess what? Number three, God is not far removed from your situation. We serve a God who gets down in the valley with us. We serve a God who sits high and yet looks low. We serve a God who understands. And eventually, as God did in Exodus chapter 3, God hears and eventually God will deliver hope. And so in this text, we see that David, who is king at the time, immediately petitions God, goes to God in prayer, asks God, hey, what did I do wrong? And in the text, God explains to David, you didn't do anything wrong. You see what I just did right there, right? You see what I just did right there? Oftentimes, we think because we're in a crisis, because we're faced with something that is hard in our own lives, we feel like it's because something we did wrong. But we have to realize that we haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes we are suffering. Sometimes we are suffering because of what somebody else has done wrong. In this 2 Samuel 21 text, God responds to David and says, you didn't do anything wrong. Your predecessor is the one who is at fault. Your predecessor, Saul, killed some people, a part of the Gibeonite community during a period of war, and he was not supposed to do that. That was immoral. That was unethical of him, right? Another light bulb should have went off in your head right then and there. God says to David, your predecessor declared war on some folks that were innocent. God says to David, your predecessor took advantage of some folks that weren't as powerful as him and his army and his community and his culture, right? Another light bulb should have went off in your head right then and there. Right now, we're living in a time where there is a particular country that is declared war with another country, and it is not of God. That's right, family. I'm talking about our current war between Russia and Ukraine, right? Oh, terrible, 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 terrible. As members of the United Church of Christ, our tenets are, we are against war. We stand for just peace. We do not stand on the side of Russia right now. We stand on the side of our brothers and sisters in the Ukraine. And another disclaimer, we also hold Ukraine accountable to say it's not right for the ways in which Ukrainian brothers and sisters are being racist to African brothers and sisters currently in Ukraine and not allowing them to have access to the train system to to leave Ukraine. That's right. Even in the midst of being oppressed themselves, the Ukrainian brothers and sisters are oppressing many African brothers and sisters who were currently there studying, going to school, right? This is wrong. And so oppressed people often oppress other folks. Hurt folks often hurt other folks. So we have to be willing to call out oppression in all its many shapes and forms. We have to be willing to call out the ways in which right now Russia has been using WNBA superstar Brittany Griner as a political pawn in this fight. We have to call out this oppression and say, where is news coverage for Brittany Griner? Why is it the media has been silent in talking about the plight of Brittany Griner? And so there is oppression taking place in all areas of this scenario. And so this text in 2 Samuel 21 reminds us that we have to be careful, beloved, of what we do, because sometimes our actions impact other people. Maybe Saul didn't understand that by killing innocent Gibeons, these actions later would have an impact on David and the people in the community later. So another reflective question for us is to reflect on, how do we be careful about our actions? And before we do anything, sit back and reflect on what are the ways in which our actions can impact other people. And so in this text, David goes to the Gibeonites and says, okay, how can I make peace with you all? What do I need to provide to you? And the Gibeonites say to David, we want all the male descendants of Saul. We want all the male descendants of Saul. By chance, there happened to be 7 sons of Saul. 7, 7, 7. What does the word 7 represent? You know, 7 represents complete. 7 represents complete. These Gibeonites, in some sense, were saying, give us these 7 descendants or sons of Saul, and then we will be complete and we will reach mediation, and this feud will be over, and therefore your famine or your drought will end. And so what does David do? David says, okay, I will hand over the descendants of Saul. Now, interestingly enough, this is where our story takes a turn. This is where our story takes a turn. This is where our story takes a turn. Verse 7, David spared the son of Saul's son Jonathan because of the oath of the Lord that was between them. The king took 2 sons of Rizpah, who she bore to Saul, and 5 sons of Merah, who she bore to Saul, and he gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites. And they impaled them on the mountain before the Lord. The 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the days of harvest, at the beginning of barley harvest. What happens in this text right there from verses 7 to 9 is something very interesting. David doesn't necessarily give all of Saul's descendants over to the Gibeonites. No, we know that David had a personal relationship with one of Saul's sons, Jonathan. Now, there are There are some biblical scholars who highlight that David and Jonathan had a very, 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 very close relationship, if you know what I mean. It's up to you for you to reflect on if you believe that or not. But it is believed that because Saul was very close to, I'm sorry, it is believed that because David was very close to Saul's son, Jonathan, David didn't want to turn over Jonathan's sons over to the Gibeonites. So in some sense, David starts picking and choosing which particular sons to give over to the Gibeonites. And this is where the injustice occurs because David picks Rizpah's sons. Rizpah, here is where the injustice is. Rizpah technically was not a wife to Saul. Rizpah technically was one of Saul's concubines, right? And so it was supposed to be understood that you wouldn't give over the sons of his concubine. You were really only supposed to give away the sons of his wives. This is where the injustice on David's part as king occurs, because in these days, concubines didn't have any rights. Concubines were of a lower status, right? In Dr. Crowder's book, When Mama Speaks, there are some biblical scholars who suggest that maybe Rizpah was more than just a concubine. Maybe Rizpah was really a second or third, fourth or fifth wife of Saul. Maybe she really did have social economic status of a higher being. Maybe she wasn't just a lowly concubine. That would be for you to decide what you particularly believe in about Rizpah's status. But we generally, most oftentimes say she was of a lower economic status. Hence why David could simply take her sons. This becomes the biblical version's first example of state-sanctioned violence of an unarmed person of color, boy or man-child, if you will. We also know something about that. State-sanctioned violence has been happening in this country time and time again, where there are Black boys who have been kidnapped and lynched. And the state has done absolutely nothing about it. That's what we mean when we say state-sanctioned violence. The first in modern times example of state-sanctioned violence to a person of color, youth, is the story of Emmett Till. That's right. You remember that story in Chicago, 1955. Our beloved Mamie Till Mosley takes her son, allows him to visit family down south in Money, Mississippi. And it is there that he is kidnapped and he is lynched. And the state does nothing about it. Mississippi never finds these white gentlemen, lynching mob folks, thugs, guilty. Nope. In the same way that we've had trouble in recent years finding folks guilty, police officers in particular, who kill Black men. We have trouble finding gentlemen, a part of police departments, guilty who killed Sandra Bland or who killed Eric Gardner, or vigilante justice, white civilians who killed Trayvon Martin. These persons all seem to avoid being found guilty. We thank God finally in recent years, in the last 3 years, that the killer, the murderer of George Floyd was found guilty recently. We at least thank God that justice finally showed up in these moments for our beloved brother George Floyd. But for every incidence of justice found for George Floyd, there's hundreds and thousands of injustices for brothers and sisters all over the world. And so our text says that the Gibeonites impaled Rizpah's sons, along with 5 other sons of Saul. What does the word impaled mean? In this text, in 2 Samuel 21, impaled means lynched. Impaled means they literally took these 7 sons, crucified them on a cross, and then lifted them in the cross in the air as a form of lynching. The way lynchings occurred in biblical days was nailing persons to crosses and then erecting the cross in the air for all to see. If you study James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, by The Cross and the Lynching Tree by James Cone. If you study James Cone's book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, the purpose of impaling someone or lynching someone on a tree or nailing somebody's body to a cross and putting the cross in the air or hanging a body from a tree was so that other people could see. Think about it for a second. To place somebody from a tree or to nail somebody to a cross and erect that cross in the air is not only to cause a gruesome death to the person who is the victim of violence, but more importantly, it's a psychological trauma being inflicted on nearby witnesses to prove a psychological point that if you don't fall in line with what the oppressors or white supremacy wants you to do, then the same fate will happen to you. The same fate will happen to you. And so this becomes now the psychological trauma of viewing violence to Black bodies that Black viewers, Black witnesses must now experience, right? When they are literally, as Billie Holiday saying, seeing this strange fruit hanging from a tree in the air or being crucified on a cross. And so, in some sense, according to our story, Rizpah, after this lynching occurs, she refuses now to have their bodies buried. Later, after they are lynched, King David sends an army of folks to prepare the bodies to be buried. And Rizpah, as an act of courage, as an act of prophetic bravery, says, no, let their bodies remain in the air so that all will see your injustice, King David, of what you allowed to happen. Rizpah challenges King David and says, was there no other way to make peace with the Gibeonites? Could you have figured out how to mediate another more peaceful resolution that would not have took the lives of innocent folks? Rizpah challenges David. Rizpah calls David out. Rizpah says, no, you won't simply bury my sons so that now you can take a blind eye and the whole community can take a blind eye to this injustice that has happened. And so it is believed that for 3 to 6 months, she sat by the bodies of these impaled sons and refused to have them buried. She would not let animals come and feed on their deceased bodies. Anytime birds would come or wild animals would come to feast on their bodies, she would immediately shoo them away. You would read more about that in verses 10 through 14. And so she stood by and watched as these bodies for 3 to 6 months were impaled and hung on a cross. It is believed, brothers and sisters, it is believed that this is the story, the biblical story, that our beloved sister Mamie Till read, that inspired her. What am I talking about? I'm so glad you asked. During the unfortunate murder of our beloved boy Emmett Till by white supremacists in Mississippi, after his body is returning back to Chicago and a funeral service is held at A.R. Lincoln's son's funeral home in Chicago, our beloved Mamie Till refused to have a closed casket. In the spirit of RISPA, she says, no, let the world see. And so during his funeral, she has an open casket, whereas people can see his mangled body. She says, no, let the world see this injustice, this atrocity that has befallen my innocent Black boy. And so we celebrate RISPA like we celebrate Mamie Till for their courage to force the world to see so that the world does not take a blind eye. It is because of Emmett Till's mother's courage that Martin Luther King would later be inspired to spearhead the civil rights movement. It is because of Emmett Till's mother's courage that Rosa Parks would say she would be inspired to remain in her seat on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, right? But however, what we must grapple with is a question that we must wrestle with today. A question that we must wrestle with today. Is there trauma in viewing violence? Is there trauma in viewing dead bodies, violence to bodies? So yes, even though RISPA for 3 to 6 months wanted people to see the deceased bodies of her sons, even though Mamie Till decided to have an open casket for the world to see what was done to her beloved boy Emmett Till, even though the Black Lives Matter movement has, as one feature or characteristic, made it known that they will share videos of violence on social media and make these videos of violence towards Black folks go viral so that the whole world sees, and use social media today as a media forum so that the whole world can see the violence. Is there trauma in viewers watching this violence? So what's their trauma that RISPA felt by watching these bodies every day for 3 to 6 months? Is there trauma that other folks in Israel experience by looking at these videos? Looking at these bodies on this cross for 3 to 6 months. Was there trauma in some sense? Was there trauma in some sense when persons attended the funeral of Emmett Till and looked at his body mangled in this casket? Was there trauma every time we view on social media videos of violence that go viral today? According to a recent psychologist by the name of Monica Williams, that's Monnica, Monica Williams, Monnica, she says, yes, there is trauma that we take in when we constantly view videos of violence. There is trauma then that we take in when we look at mangled dead bodies. And she says that this trauma often leads to us experiencing PTSD. PTSD, PTSD. That's right. That's right. PTSD, PTSD, PTSD. And so there is something important for us to grapple with. There's something very, very, very important for us to grapple with. How do we manage PTSD when we witness violence? There are some very important coping strategies that we want to lift up and highlight. I wonder what was Rispa's coping strategies in this text. I wonder what was Mamie Teal's coping strategies. I wonder, after you view a video of violence that is trauma inducing, what becomes the coping strategy that you take in? I want to invite you, brothers and sisters, to please, please, please take up these various coping strategies that I am highlighting here. Spend time with people you love. Practice mindfulness. Exercise. Participate in eating healthy. Participate in journaling. And more than anything, get mental health counseling. These become very, very, very important for us as we experience trauma and watch violence to the Black body. This becomes very, 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 very important for us today. We cannot take it lightly. It is so important that we don't take this lightly. Why? Because PTS has lasting effects on us if left untreated. Did you know, if you refuse to practice those coping strategies I highlighted earlier, you may have nightmares or night terrors. You may have flashbacks, meaning your memory is literally infiltrated with these traumatic experiences. You may live in a perpetual fear of distress. You may live in a perpetual fear of avoidance. You may live in memory loss, negative beliefs, fear, anger, guilt, or shame, an inability to maintain emotionally connected relationships with others, meaning you will become detached. You'll also experience reckless behavior. You will also be hyper alert, easily startled or scared, and have a lack of focus. These become our symptoms, according to Monica Williams, if our PTSD is unchecked, meaning we don't get help. And so please, 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 brothers and sisters, please get help. It becomes so very important for us to get help. The way our story in 2 Samuel 21 concludes is that eventually David has to go back and apologize to Rispa and say, I'm sorry. He has to eventually make amends to Rispa and acknowledge what he has done wrong. What I love about Rispa is she stays on the wall until she gets an acknowledgement from David that what he has done is wrong. We must continue to fight for justice. We must continue to hold oppressors of racism and sexism, homophobia, classism, ableism accountable until there is an acknowledgement of wrong. It's not enough just to simply say, I'm sorry and apologize. There has to be an acknowledgement of repentance first before we can just turn the other cheek and agree to somebody's apology for African enslavement. We first need this country to acknowledge that African enslavement was wrong before there can simply be some giving of reparations. There must first be an acknowledgement of the fact that African enslavement from 1619 to to 1865 was wrong. Check out what's happening right now in the city of Evanston, Illinois. Go to Google and simply Google Evanston, Illinois gives reparations. Yes, this a north suburban town in Illinois has set national headlines as giving reparations to brothers and sisters who live in Evanston, who can show that they are descendants of enslaved African beings. This city is acknowledging, first and foremost, the atrocity of African enslavement and then making repentance through the form of reparations to the descendants. I wish that what's happening in Evanston would happen all around our country today. My brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us on today. There's a wonderful book that I also want to invite you to reflect on and purchase. It just came out. It's new. It's hot off the press. It just came out last week by Dr. Thema Bryant. Thema Bryant. I want to invite you to grab this book. Grab this book. Overcome Fear and Trauma to Reclaim Your Whole and Authentic Self. This is a jewel. Trauma is heavy in our lives today. And we need something that will help us work through our trauma. I may even have us use this book as another Bible study book. Please, please, please grab this book. Grab this book. Grab this book. It is a jewel, family. It is a jewel. Grab this book. I want to say the last and final concluding thought is, how do you not give up like Rispa? How do you not give up like Rispa? Who needs to be held accountable in your life, in your larger community? Until they admit what they did to you was wrong and they make repentance. And at the same time, how have you been David at various points in your life? Who do you need to apologize to? Who do you need to say, hey, I did wrong, and I need to acknowledge something that I did that wasn't right in your life, and I need to make repentance to you? I want to invite you, family. You've been Rispa, and at the same time, you've been David. I want to invite you, family. I want to invite you, family. I want to invite you, family, to delve into this deep reflective work and commit to action. Thank you so much, family, for joining us for our Bible study. At this time, we ask, if you got any questions, if you got any thoughts, feel free to throw them in the chat. We want to hear your voice. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you don't mind, share. Please share this video. Share this video. Help somebody through the spirit of digital evangelism. Okay, family? I had a blast. Until we meet again, see you next Tuesday.